Tonight on Primetime, Trump's Greenland gambit returns, putting Arctic security, Danish sovereignty, and NATO unity on collision course, just as the alliance tries to keep its message firmly focused on Russia. Denmark says Greenland is not up for grabs. Welcome to the program. I'm Andy Miuch. Donald Trump has put Greenland back at the center of NATO tensions, saying the Arctic island should be controlled by the United States. Denmark and Greenland immediately rejected the remarks, warning that the island's future belongs to its people, not Washington. Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where U.S. President Donald Trump once again puts Greenland at the center of transatlantic tensions. Speaking alongside Turkish President Erdogan at the NATO summit in Ankara, Trump said Greenland should, quote, be controlled by the United States, not by Denmark, arguing the island is critical to American national security due to its strategic location in the Arctic. He also claimed Denmark failed to invest enough in Greenland while Russia and China expand their presence in the region, and that this issue has harmed U.S. ties with NATO. The remarks were immediately rejected by Denmark's Prime Minister. Mette Frederiksen said Greenland is not for sale, and there are no plans during the summit to discuss issues concerning the High North, the Arctic, or Greenland. The renewed dispute comes at an awkward moment for NATO. Denmark is one of the alliance's founding members, while Greenland hosts a U.S.-operated space base, an essential hub for missile warning, space surveillance, and Arctic defense. The dispute has persisted since Trump's return to office, with Washington holding regular talks with Danish and Greenlandic officials, but making little progress. As NATO leaders try to present a united front on defense spending in Russia, Trump's latest comments risk overshadowing that message by reopening one of the alliance's most sensitive sovereignty disputes. And with competition in the Arctic intensifying, Greenland's strategic importance is only growing, making this debate unlikely to disappear anytime soon. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Well, joining me now to discuss this from a different angle is Mette Nord-Klaus-Høj, an American politics specialist at the Danish financial newspaper Børsen. Mette, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on Primetime. Now, Trump has once again raised the issue of Greenland. How is this being perceived in Denmark? Did the Danes think this episode was over?
I don't think Danes really expected it to be over, but since there's nothing new in what Trump is saying, the reaction broadly has been one of like a big sigh, like, oh no, not this again. And then we've had obviously representatives from Greenland and Denmark reiterate that no, Greenland is not for sale. We will cooperate with the Americans to pretty much any extent they'd like us to, but Greenland is its own country and it's not for sale.
Trump first floated this idea back in 2019, and we had those cancellations of visits and the straight-up rejection of any such transaction. Does his now new argument of national security, strategic importance, does that make this version of an quote-unquote offer harder to ignore?
No, I don't think so, not at all. Because it's kind of, he's had that argument all along and along other arguments. But Denmark has been crystal clear right from the outset that we're more than willing as a country to work with the Americans in any way that's needed for the US, for NATO, for Greenland, for us, to secure the Arctic. as it pertains to Greenland and where Greenland is located. So there's never been any denial of any wishes that Americans might have in terms of strengthening security in Greenland. We've always been very, very willing to work with the Americans on that to the extent that they think it's necessary.
And there is a base, just for our viewers, on Greenland, U.S. base. Now,
yeah, it used to be 13, I believe it was.
Indeed, indeed. Greenland's leaders say, of course, that the island's future rests with Greenlanders, but are their voices heard enough in this sort of a shouting match between Washington and Copenhagen?
I actually think so. I think this, from my perspective, this whole conflict over Greenland between the U.S. and Denmark and Greenland has strengthened the ties between Greenland and Denmark. When representatives of Denmark had been in Washington, D.C. to talk to American representatives, they brought along with them leadership from Greenland. There's been close coordination, and at no point has Denmark said Greenland is ours. I'm terribly
sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just receiving word that the U.S. President Donald Trump is stepping out on the podium to give his closing remarks on this NATO summit in Ankara. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Anyways, while we get the link set up, let's just say that the U.S. President Donald Trump today had a busy schedule at the NATO summit in Ankara, where he met Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, who spoke to him about achieving peace with Russia and Syria's President al-Shara. Let's go for a minute just to set things up, and we'll be right back.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
More than 20,000 partisan fighters have been hidden. We found only 3,000.
My grandmother had 3 brothers. In the graveyard, the body of just one of them.
Their struggle was very unequal and against a state that had defeated such a force as Nazi Germany.
A lot of resistant fighters in the beginning of Soviet occupation actually would end up here, if not killed somewhere in the woods.
She was arrested at her home. Her 7-year-old daughter ran to her and screamed, "Mom, please take me with you." This record having the names of the individuals who were placed in the list of deportations.
I was born in Kengia, in a labor camp. My mother was a partisan liaison.
The first years were extremely difficult, of course. Poverty, hunger. The temperature sometimes dropped to minus 50 degrees.
The train stations, like the one behind me, once said goodbyes to thousands of people carried from across the Baltic states toward Siberia.
Welcome back. You are watching Primetime. The NATO summit in the Turkish capital has come to a close after 2 days of talks on the alliance's future priorities. NATO Chief Mark Rutte says the meeting has laid the groundwork for the next phase of NATO's security agenda. Adam Morrow reports.
NATO chief Mark Rutte says the Ankara summit has marked a turning point for the alliance, describing it as one focused on delivering concrete commitments rather than making new promises. Speaking at a closing press conference, Rutte said allied leaders had agreed on a clear path towards strengthening NATO's deterrence and defense capabilities over the coming decade. The issue of defense spending, meanwhile, dominated both days of the two-day summit. Rutte welcomed what he described as credible national plans to meet NATO's target of investing 5% of GDP in defense and security by 2035, saying allies were now turning financial commitments into real military capabilities. He also stressed the need to expand defense industrial production, saying NATO has to produce more missiles, ammunition, air defense systems, and other vital military equipment to respond to a dangerous global security environment. On Ukraine, Rutte reaffirmed NATO's long-term support for Kiev, saying allies would continue providing the military assistance needed for Ukraine to defend itself while maintaining pressure on Russia. Earlier the same day, U.S. President Donald Trump met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on the summit's sidelines, where they discussed continued military support for Kiev, including additional air defense capabilities. Both sides described the meeting as constructive, underscoring continued engagement between Washington and Kiev, despite earlier strains in the relationship. Rutte, for his part, said the United States remains fully committed to NATO, while welcoming increased defense contributions from European allies and Canada as evidence of a stronger transatlantic partnership. The summit brought together leaders from NATO's 32 member states at Turkey's presidential complex, where discussions focused on defense spending, the war in Ukraine, Black Sea security, the Middle East, and expanding the alliance's industrial base. Alongside the leaders meeting, NATO's Defense Industry Forum unveiled new multinational procurement and production initiatives designed to accelerate military manufacturing and improve interoperability across the alliance. Rutte said the decisions taken in Ankara would strengthen NATO's collective defense and ensure the alliance remains prepared to meet evolving security challenges. Implementation of the summit's commitments, he added, will now become NATO's top priority. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Turkish capital Ankara.
Well, we have a lot to unpack from this Ankara summit, and I'm pleased to say now that I'm joined in the studio by A News' Deputy Editor-in-Chief Orhan Amashov. Orhan, thank you so much for joining me here always. Great to have you. Now let's start with these closing remarks by both the NATO Secretary General and the US President. They both called this summit a success. Donald Trump went as far to say there was love in the room between NATO leaders. How much did they succeed in projecting unity here?
I think to a certain extent, Andy, they succeeded in projecting the unity and cohesion between different NATO countries. A number of key parameters are to be taken into account. 5% the budget requirement has been reiterated, and that's an absolute mass. Of course, figures are there incredibly important. The US is not just investing in its own military defense industry, but also actually increasing its own support for European countries in many ways. But that support, of course, is not primarily to be understood in a financial sense, but basically European countries are encouraged to produce their own systems, and the US is encouraging that process. But for me, the most important thing, there are bare minimum level that must have been maintained, and that has been maintained. On Ukraine, of course, there's 70 billion support. This is very important. It's not just symbolic, of course, there is a substance to it. Naturally, Ukraine is not just seen as a country which is to be defended, but Ukraine is part of the European defense architecture. And the license regarding Ukraine being able to produce Patriot systems is another important moment. Basically, defense spending is going to be an important part of this administration. Figures we heard, the trillion figure and 1.8 trillion figure also is a clear reflection that US is going to increase its own military expenditure internally, but also encourage other European countries to increase. I mean, I think if to consider the question of to what extent European countries, NATO allies, have been able to project an image of unity, yes, but to what extent this summit has changed the dynamics around the world, I'm not entirely sure about that. I mean, if you remember during our conversation which preceded the summit, I said that quite often there are massive expectations prior to the summit, but one particular summit, whatever the extent of the cumulative impact of the agreement signed there may be, cannot change the entire situation. So I still circumscribe to that view. But back to your question, projection of an image is there, but what is behind that image is another question, of course.
And not everything went so smoothly. The US President Donald Trump made sure of that. He once again laid out a claim that the United States should control Greenland. Yeah. He ordered his Secretary Bessent to cut off trade with Spain. Spain had a very cool reaction to this. The Prime Minister said that the relations remain very positive. Do you think that the Europeans have now understood how to deal with messages coming from Washington?
Well, I perfectly understand that President Donald Trump is a very unique character. He said a number of things about Greenland before, but he never acted upon that. I mean, if you remember when I was in Davos this year, basically, when he delivered that famous speech towards the end of the conference, he said that if we need to take Greenland physically, we can do, but probably we will not do. I think that people remember that particular statement. Well, of course, interim arrangement could be considered. Something very similar to British sovereign base in Cyprus in Greenland could be considered. And I think that that is going to be the consensus that European countries and the United States will reach eventually. But also they take into account that President Trump, despite the fact that they naturally represent the most important country around the world, still a man of certain unique characteristics. He one day said that Iran is going to collapse and one civilization will die. The second day he said that this deal between Iran and the United States could change the destiny of the Middle East and so forth. So naturally, any statement coming from President Donald Trump is being treated very cautiously and not necessarily taken for granted. But a reality that we are all facing for European countries, they need to increase their own strategic autonomy. That has been their ambition from the very beginning. As President Trump said, that these countries are very rich, they're very prosperous countries, but being rich and prosperous does not necessarily mean that you can protect yourself. This has been one of the key questions for the past decades. If Europe wants to be standalone power to be reckoned with, on a par with the United States, which is a very lofty ambition, probably unlikely to be reached at any point, at least in our lifetime, but the expenditure should increase and there should be strategic autonomy. And in some ways, this American approach makes European countries think about this autonomy in a way that they did not think before. I just want to go back to your original question about projection of an image. I think the most important derivable probably from this summit was Turkey-US relation, that bilateral dimension between those two countries. We see the increase of the influence of Turkey. We see to what extent Turkish influence in Syria is increasing, and with Ahmed al-Shara also being received nicely. But ultimately, the overall reality here is that projection of the image thing happened, but substantively, not much has changed. I mean, declaring Russia as a major terror threat is one thing, but actually dealing with that threat is another thing. And in the context of Ukraine, we see mobilization, but not necessarily tangible outcome being perceived as in the offing.
On that dealing with the Ukraine-Russia war, we've seen Donald Trump today meet with Volodymyr Zelensky. The two briefly spoke to reporters before their meeting, and Trump was suggesting that the Patriot missile systems will be produced in Europe, yes, which he later confirmed now in his closing press conference that a Patriot missile facility will be established in Europe. He also said that the Americans have the best equipment. Does this mean that this transatlantic alliance is becoming more and more transactional?
Well, it has always been transactional. I don't necessarily think it has been based on values in any specific way from the very beginning. Transatlantic alliance between European countries and the United States of America was a result of the Second World War in many ways, and Britain and US played an important role. In that particular dimension, you see the value-based transactionalism, wherein the values played an important role for some considerable time, of course, because those countries, European countries and the United States of America, share a particular type of government, and there's a particular enemy, which was Soviet Union and then Russia, sharing certain characteristics. But I think it has always been value-based transactionism, wherein transactionism was a preponderant element. And for European countries, this particular relationship provided protection, military protection, and also financial prosperity. For US, it meant leverage. So basically in foreign policy, many European countries, whether liked it or not, they followed the US suit. But that is basically the essence of transactionalism. The problem here is that at this very moment when the epicenter of gravity of world politics is moving from Atlantic to the Pacific, the reality is that no longer Europe is perceived to be the epicenter of US interests, but China is actually. Therefore, the containment policy followed and implemented in relation to China makes Europe secondary. But to what extent that will remain the same? It's all about Europe's cumulative power. Europe cumulatively is not in rise, it's actually in relative decline, and that may be the main reason why actually this shift that's happening from Atlantic to Pacific may be a long-term thing.
Well, at least the countries in the east of Europe, at least the Baltic states and Poland, are increasing rather rapidly their defense spending. Some of the officials from the Baltic states even had little pins saying 5% proud of their expanded spending. Would you say that Europe has gotten a wake-up call from Washington and then responded in a positive manner for its future defense?
Well, wake-up call was received a couple of years ago. It is not a kind of call that was received from the Trump administration in the first place. There have been very clear indications coming from the Obama administration and the subsequent administration that Europe should be able to defend itself. And there was an expectation. This is a moment which can be described as crisis of some sort, which also, of course, naturally entails the elements of hope and move forward. When I was in Brussels last year in August, we were attending a NATO meeting there. One of the things which have emerged there about US desire to leave NATO or abandon NATO, in terms of the infrastructure there in Europe, the US presence footprint is so massive, is so entrenched, and is in such a distinct way US-centered that actually US withdrawal from NATO is an utter impossibility. This institution has been US-centered from the very beginning. It served US interests very well indeed. It is an effective containment mechanism in many ways. And I don't necessarily think that we should take for granted the US disgruntlement when it comes to the military expenditure as a confirmation of US desire to leave any point soon. I mean, of course, Europeans do understand that, but also Europeans know that there are certain projects in which US could actually limit its financial contribution. So it's far more complicated than it may appear. These countries are increasing their expenditure. It's absolutely vital thing to do. But ultimately, of course, they also acutely conscious of the reality that US will never leave NATO, because after all, at its origin, NATO is a US creation.
And finally, Orhan, during this summit, we've seen US strike Iranian targets after Iran reportedly struck some 3 vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. How can NATO respond to this entire situation, and do they even want to get involved here?
Well, NATO as an organization is not part of this conflict, of course, but still there has been a supportive statement coming from NATO General Secretary regarding this matter, that US actions are understandable. And Iran is perceived as a rogue state by many NATO countries. What started back on 28th of February is not naturally supported by many NATO countries, but ultimately US at this very juncture, after the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding, in the context of this particular strike, it seems to be supported by NATO at large. And what really President Trump said about Memorandum of Understanding, about Iran, also reveals that chameleonic nature. When it was signed, it was one of the greatest deals that could have changed the destiny of the Middle East. Now Iranians are being referred to with the application of a particular term. And of course, Europeans are fully, and NATO allies, European countries that belong to NATO are fully aware of that. I think NATO will try to distance itself from what's happening in Iran, but also they will not take actions that would go against the US interests in such a way that President Trump could take those actions against NATO that NATO countries, NATO allies do not want him to take.
Orhan, thank you so much for breaking this down for us. All right, coming up, we'll take a closer look at Reform UK leader Nigel Farage, as his resignation as MP has raised questions around the United Kingdom. We'll be right back.
We are in Seoul's Republic of Korea, a country that for more than 70 years has lived in a shadow of unfinished war.
I was 18 years old when the Korean War broke out.
My two brothers were dragged out to the front yard of the village public hall and forcibly subjected to a trial under the name of People's Trial.
The military demarcation line, created after the Korean War, became a massive wall, preventing separated families from meeting.
Less than a kilometer away lies North Korea.
지금 우리 무장력은 그 어떤 위기에도 대응할 철저한 준비가 되어 있으며
Подписанный сегодня договор предусматривает в том числе оказание взаимной помощи в случае агрессии против одного из участников.
Russian-Ukraine war now is connected with North Korean participation in Russian army.
The complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is the only outcome that we will find acceptable.
If the US persists in such hostile policy towards the DPRK, there will never be denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Welcome back. You are watching Primetime. Russian athletes could soon return to international competitions after the International Olympic Committee provisionally lifted its suspension of Russia's Olympic Committee. The move opens a possible path toward Olympic qualifiers, but Ukraine says it sends the wrong signal while Moscow's war continues.
Russia's athletes could soon be back in international competitions, including the Olympic qualifiers in Los Angeles in 2028. It's after the International Olympic Committee provisionally lifted the suspension of the Russian Olympic Committee. The ROC had been suspended since October 2023 after incorporating sports bodies from Russian-controlled regions of Ukraine. The IOC says that issue has now been resolved, but no decision has been made on whether Russia's flag, anthem or colours can be used at the Games. Restrictions on Russian state officials and on holding IOC events in Russia also remain in place. IOC President Kirsty Coventry says the decision is aimed at giving athletes a path back to the Olympics.
We wanted to ensure all athletes have the possibility to compete at the Olympic Games and not be held responsible for their government's actions. And I believe that this is what this decision speaks to. It allows for Russian athletes to take part in sport competitions, but we've also been very clear that we do not condone any violence and war around the world, and we will continue with that stance.
The IOC says international federations will decide how to move forward in their own competitions. Coventry said anti-doping safeguards will remain important before Russian athletes return to major events. However, Ukraine's foreign ministry criticised the decision, saying it sends a deeply concerning signal while Moscow continues its war. It called on governments hosting international sporting events and sports federations not to allow Russian state symbols at competitions.
Well, the practical impact may go further than the IOC's headline decision. Olympic bodies are now being encouraged to move away from the strict neutral status vetting process used since Russia's full-scale invasion, potentially making it easier for Russian athletes to enter qualifying events ahead of Los Angeles 2028. To discuss Ukraine's reaction, we are now joined by Bohdan Bernatsky, research fellow at Vilnius University, based in Lithuania. Bohdan, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on Primetime. Now, Ukraine says that this IOC decision sends a deeply concerning signal while Russia's war continues. What's the real concern here? Is it the return of the athletes, or is it the political message being sent to Moscow?
Thank you for inviting me, and I think it's absolutely necessary to reflect on this decision, as I'm working for years in field of sanctions, and there is a theory in sanctions which covers how sanctions should be lifted and how they should be implemented. And basically what we observe here, that there is no theory, no background, no reason to lift sport sanctions on Russian athletes. It's simply a political decision which apparently not been supported by many European sport federations, and I think somehow happened accidentally, because usually media outlets would report or should have reported about such signs a week before such important decisions take place. And what is most concerning, I think right now, is that it provides no incentives for Russian government, for Russian sport federations and Russian associations, actually to meet the conditions under which Russian athletes and Russian sport associations were banned from participating in Olympic Games, because they implemented no steps towards peace settlement, towards peace agreement. Last 2 weeks, Moscow, Russian army heavily shelled Kyiv with ballistic missiles, killed dozens of people. To date, about 650 Ukrainian sportsmen, athletes died from Russian strikes, many of them young athletes, like 15, 12 years old. And with all of that in mind, with all this situation and background, International Olympic Committee suddenly decided to lift sanctions on Russian athletes and Russian sport federation and so on. It has absolutely no reason to do so. No objective reason is in place.
Well, the IOC argues that athletes should not be punished for the actions of their government. But from Ukraine's perspective, can Russian sport actually be separate from the Russian state?
I think the answer is obvious not, because, for instance, there is a major Russian sport club which is affiliated with the Russian military. It's called CSKA. So this is, let's say, is a paramilitary sport organization, and many sportsmen from this club participate in, for instance, in 2022, in the concert in Moscow, headed by Putin, the illegal annexation of Ukrainian territories, where they celebrated this event and Russian athletes actually attended it and, let's say, legitimized such decisions. For instance, at least I think about 200 Russian sportsmen athletes visited temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, and doing so, they legitimize the illegal occupation. And for instance, many sport clubs now located on occupied territories, especially in Crimea, so they use this as a summer camp quite often. And I could imagine that future Russian Olympic athletes, they would actually hold their trainings in Crimea, in occupied Crimea, and then I be interested. I wonder, like, what the president of International Olympic Committee would say then, like whether the sport is still outside politics or not, when Russian athletes would come from occupied Crimean camps, sport camps, and so on. So it's, let's say, obvious to say that sports is outside politics, but we could claim that everything is outside politics, which in the practice is not. And sport and Olympic Games is a great soft power which Russia would utilize, certainly, while returning to international sport games and competitions.
Well, IOC says that this specific issue has now been resolved. But with the war still continuing, does Ukraine still have a strong argument for keeping Russian athletes out, and what can it do?
Yes, definitely, yes. Together with European sport associations, sport federations, there's still many levers in place to utilize and to apply and to make pressure. Again, European sport federations, European Union, and the United States, and I hope the position of the United States would be more pronounced in that case, could use financial leverage on actually how much investments would go to the Olympic Committee, to the Olympic Games, what travel rules would apply to the Olympic athletes, and so on. So I think, like, European Union and the country member states of the European Union, they one of the largest making largest contributions to the development of Olympic sports. That's why, obviously, together with Kyiv, EU capitals, they have a huge leverage. And I think now, because this decision came out unexpectedly, which I'm surprised about, but already observed some public announcements made by United Kingdom and other foreign offices that it is an acceptable decision, and there would be reaction to address the situation. So I hope there would be coordinated reaction. But again, the thing is that it would be problematic to revert or to turn back, or, like, I don't know, to switch off this decision, let's say. So as like, you need international support, you need international coordinated actions to adopt such type of decisions. Once they reverted, like, you have a little room of maneuver to do something more. But again, I think financial leverage is still in hands of EU capitals, and there should be coordinated response to such unilateral actions by Executive Committee of Olympic, by the board of the Olympic Committee.
Bogdan, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. Some critics point to Israel and ask, why can one country be banned and another not during its war? Is there a double standard here, would you say, or is Russia's case different because of how its Olympic Committee is tied to occupied territory?
I think evidently the gravity of the situation, the number of international law violations apparently like numerous times higher in case of Russian unprovoked aggression against Ukraine. And again, I would not dare to compare like how international community respond to international violations and to violations of international norms. I think it's important that the response is in place. And what we could observe is that, like even with case with Israel, there are some sanctions applied to those who took some part in the occupation of West Bank. It's like so-called West Bank settlement regime. So we see the reaction of international community about what double standards people speaking about. That's quite surprising because some actions are in place. Probably they're not at the scale like some people want them to be, but already there are some sanctions response to this situation. Of course, the exclusion from international sport events or sport global forum is a different kind. But again, I think here is important to consider that Russia occupies almost the territory like of 3 oblasts of Autonomous Republic Crimea, city Sevastopol, and trying to occupy more and more land. And with recent statements made by a Russian president, they are not going to make any deal with Ukrainian government or with the United States about ceasefire here and now. So there would no end of this war in the nearest future. But now we see sanctions relief here and now. So what arguments would have Moscow in the future to stop the aggressive war when there are no levers on Kremlin to apply? So I think it's very dangerous precedent to say so. Again, double standards, it's something that we cannot deal with. Like it's always a political choice to apply sanctions and not to apply sanctions. But probably we should speak about what is the right choice and what is the wrong.
And looking ahead to the 2028 Olympics in LA, Bogdan, what would you say should Ukraine and its allies do now? Should they push for a total sporting ban back on Russia, or maybe focus on strict conditions about neutrality, symbols, and anti-doping?
Considering that decisions now been adopted and there is little chance for them to be reverted, I think that the best option and scenario for future Olympic Games is strict conditions applied to Russian athletes, that they are not part of any kind of activities which intended how to support or benefit from the aggressive war against Ukraine. So there should be no connection with Russian military forces. But you could imagine that half probably of Russian athletes would be immediately disqualified if this condition to be applied. There should be no public support made by a Russian athlete for the occupation. But again, I think already there are about 200 Russian athletes identified by Ukrainian governments who publicly supported the occupation or visited the occupied territories. And International Olympic Committee is making tricky things, saying like we are not recognizing sport organizations based on the occupied territories. But the key problem here is that Russian athletes based in Moscow, like or other Russian regions, they quite often visited the occupied territories of Ukraine. And there is nothing said about it, like whether those sportsmen would be allowed to participate or not. So yes, definitely strict conditions shall apply to all athletes from Russian Federation, and definitely there should be no place for those who benefiting or advocating for the aggressive war.
Bogdan, thank you kindly for joining us on Primetime and sharing your insight.
Thank you.
All right, after the break, we'll check in with our correspondents around the globe. Don't go away.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
More than 20,000 partisan fighters have been hidden. We found only 3,000.
My grandmother had 3 brothers. In the graveyard, the body of just one of them.
Their struggle was very unequal and against a state that had defeated such a force as Nazi Germany.
A lot of resistant fighters in the beginning of Soviet occupation actually would end up here, if not killed somewhere in the woods.
She was arrested at her home. Her 7-year-old daughter ran to her and screamed, "Mom, please take me with you."
This report having the names of the individuals who were placed in the list of deportations.
I was born in Kengia, in a labor camp. My mother was a partisan liaison.
The first years were extremely difficult, of course. Poverty, hunger. The temperature sometimes dropped to -50 degrees.
The train stations like the one behind me once said goodbyes to thousands of people carried from across the Baltic states toward Siberia.
Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenging.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories. Welcome to Gabon. One important note to fears. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the 8th of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv, Washington, London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, for A News.
Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Let's now check in with our correspondents, and we start in Azerbaijan, where a major green energy project linking the Caspian region to Europe is entering a new phase. Ministers and senior officials from Azerbaijan, Georgia, Hungary, and Romania have gathered in Baku for the 12th Ministerial and Steering Committee meeting on the Caspian, Black Sea, Europe Green Energy Corridor. Aytan Shukurova has the details.
Europe's next major green energy corridor is moving a step closer to reality. Ministers and senior officials from Azerbaijan, Georgia, Hungary and Romania have gathered in Baku for the 12th Ministerial and Steering Committee meeting on the Caspian Black Sea Europe Green Energy Corridor. held under the Strategic Partnership Agreement on the development and transmission of green energy. The meeting also brought together representatives of the European Union, international financial institutions, transmission system operators and project partners. Azerbaijan's Energy Minister Pervez Shahbazov said the project has now moved from the planning phase to the development and implementation stage, with securing financing and advancing delivery now the shared priorities of the participating countries.
Together with other green energy corridor initiatives connecting Central Asia with the South Caucasus, Turkey and Europe, provides a strong foundation for expanding the project's resource base and supporting its future diversification through additional routes. By the end of next year, Azerbaijan will commission 2 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity, supported by $2.6 billion in domestic and foreign investment directed towards renewable energy projects and the strengthening of the national electricity grid. Overall, by 2032, Azerbaijan plans to develop nearly 8 gigawatts of onshore and offshore renewable energy capacity. Exporting a significant share of this clean electricity through 4 international interconnectors is one of our strategic energy priorities.
A joint letter has been signed and addressed to the EU Commissioner for Energy and Housing, seeking to have the project included on the European Union's list of priority cross-border energy infrastructure projects.
The corridor is expected to strengthen regional energy connectivity by linking renewable electricity from the Caspian region with European markets through new cross-border transmission infrastructure. Ayten Shkurova, Zeynel Abdin Hassanov, A News.
Jordan and Azerbaijan have agreed on introducing visa-free travel for ordinary passport holders and closer cooperation in the energy sector during Jordan's Deputy Prime Minister's visit to Baku. Chimnaz Shahlar has more.
Jordan's Deputy Prime Minister and Ministers of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates Ayman al-Safari is in Baku on an official visit. Al-Safari held talks with Azerbaijan's Foreign Minister Ceyhun Bayramov, first in a one-on-one format, later together with their delegations. The discussions focused on expanding bilateral cooperation in political, economic, trade and humanitarian fields, as well as regional and international developments.
We look forward to more cooperation, and I think the exchanges that we're going to have on multiple levels and in multiple fields in the coming few months will definitely result in practical steps that will increase cooperation in trade, investment, tourism and many other sectors as well.
The visit produced 2 key outcomes. The two countries signed an agreement abolishing visa requirements for holders of ordinary passports. Azerbaijan and Jordan also signed a memorandum of understanding on cooperation in the energy sector. The ministers also reviewed the cooperation within international organizations and exchanged views on regional security, stressing that the current crisis in the Middle East can only be resolved through political and diplomatic means. Bayramov also briefed his Jordanian counterpart on the Azerbaijan-Armenia normalization process, post-conflict reconstruction in the liberated areas and ongoing challenges posed by landmines.
I briefed my counterpart on the progress achieved over the past year in advancing peace and the normalization of interstate relations between Azerbaijan and Armenia. I also shared updates that the number of people who have returned, as well as those living, studying and working in the region, has now exceeded 90,000. We also agreed that, during one of our upcoming visits, my esteemed colleague and friend and I will travel to the region together and have the opportunity to witness these changes firsthand.
An Azerbaijan economic delegation is also expected to visit Jordan in the near future to explore new opportunities for bilateral cooperation. Earlier in the day, President Ilham Aliyev received al-Safari, invited King Abdullah II to visit Azerbaijan and discussed ways to deepen bilateral ties, including possibility of launching regular direct flights between the countries. I'm Chimnaz Shahlar with Naitik Mehmadov for A News.
A sharp warning from Tbilisi to Brussels tonight. Georgia's parliament speaker is pushing back hard against a new European Union proposal that could limit voting rights, including the veto for future member states, saying it risks turning candidate countries into second-class members. Nini Nikolaishvili has the story in Tbilisi.
Speaking in Belgrade at the first ever conference of speakers of parliament from European Union candidate countries, Georgia's Shalva Paposhvili delivered some of his sharpest remarks yet on the bloc's enlargement process. At the center of his message was a new EU initiative that could restrict voting rights, including the veto for countries joining the bloc in the future. Paposhvili firmly rejected the idea of a two-tiered membership. He told reporters that if the EU changes its voting procedures, those changes need to apply equally to all members, not just to newcomers. He did not hold back on the comparison either, saying that EU should not put itself in a comic situation by turning the phrase "all are equal, but some are more equal" from Orwellian satire into actual policy. He went further, accusing individual EU states and at times Brussels itself of imposing shifting and unpredictable conditions on candidate countries. He described this as resembling political blackmail rather than genuine partnership and linked the obstacles to internal EU politics, election cycles and long-standing historical disputes between member states. Paposhvili called for enlargement to be strictly merit-based with clear and consistent benchmarks that don't shift depending on the political mood in Brussels. He urged the candidate countries, including Georgia, Serbia, and others across the Western Balkans, to stand together rather than compete with one another. He made the comments at the Belgrade conference, themed Shaping Europe's Future Together, which wrapped up with a joint declaration emphasizing unity among candidate status. The European Union has not publicly responded yet. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Iran's religious city of Mashhad is gearing up to hold the burial services of the former supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei on Thursday. A News' Turah Shiralilu reports from the city where the late leader's body is expected to be laid to rest at the shrine of the 8th Imam of Shia Muslims.
Authorities here in the northeast city of Mashhad are carrying out the final preparations to host the public farewell and burial rituals of the late supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, together with members of his household who were killed in the Israeli-US attacks on the 28th of February. With a population of more than 3 million, Mashhad is Iran's second largest city after the capital Tehran and is home to the mausoleum of Imam Reza, one of the most revered saints of Shia Islam. The week-long huge processions, which began last Saturday in Tehran, continued in the Iranian city of Qom and the Iraqi cities of Najaf and Karbala, where the shrines of the first and third Shia Imams are located. The rituals will end on Thursday here in Mashhad, the hometown of the former leader of Iran, by laying his body to rest at the shrine of the 8th Imam of Shiites. Ayatollah Khamenei shaped the domestic and foreign policies of the post-Islamic Revolution Iran longer than any other political figure of his generation. His extended funeral rituals are seen as a tribute to his legacy, as well as a demonstration of post-war resilience and continuity, resulting in the leadership of his son, Ayatollah Sayyid Mojtaba Khamenei. In the meantime, Tehran has been signaling its defiance in the standoff with the US and Israel, showcasing its regional power by transferring the funeral rites on Wednesday to neighboring Iraq. Turah Shiralilu from Mashhad for A News.
Pakistan is preparing to begin a new enforcement phase targeting undocumented Afghan nationals from July 10th. Islamabad says the move is about immigration control and security, but the UN and rights groups are urging safe and voluntary returns. Mariam Zia reports from Islamabad.
Preparations are underway across the country as Pakistan is entering the latest enforcement phase of its illegal foreigners repatriation plan, first announced in October 2023. From the 10th of July, Afghan nationals found without valid visas will face immediate arrest under new government orders. The federal government has instructed all provincial administrations to accelerate deportations, including visa overstay cases. Authorities will begin submitting daily enforcement reports from the 11th of July. In Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, where authorities have announced a province-wide enforcement operation from the 10th of July, officials say more than 14,000 Afghan families have already returned to Afghanistan in the first week of July. Pakistan has hosted millions of Afghans since the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. Islamabad says the policy applies only to foreigners residing illegally and is necessary for immigration enforcement and national security. However, Afghanistan's Taliban administration rejects Pakistan's allegations linking Afghan nationals to militancy. Meanwhile, the United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR, and human rights organizations continue to call for returns to be voluntary, safe, and consistent with international protection standards. Mariam Zia, A News, Islamabad.
Meanwhile, senior UNDP and UNHCR officials have met Afghan officials in Kabul. The talks focused on refugee returns, reintegration, economic support, and development projects. As Afghanistan says, millions of people have returned after years of displacement. Tamim Bahis has the details in Kabul.
A delegation from the United Nations Development Programme, the UNDP, and the UN Refugee Agency, the UNHCR, met with Afghanistan's Deputy Prime Minister Abdusalam Hanafi this week in Kabul. Hanafi said such discussions are important for strengthening coordination and cooperation between Afghan authorities and international organizations. He mentioned that decades of war had caused major human and financial losses in the country and needed cooperation in different sectors. He held talks with the UNDP Administrator Alexander De Croo and the UN High Commissioner for Refugees Barham Saleh. UNDP's Alexander De Croo praised Afghan authorities' efforts in security, anti-narcotics, anti-corruption, economic development and investment. He said UNDP and partner organizations were ready to cooperate in strengthening Afghanistan's economic system, regional trade, infrastructure, agriculture and irrigation projects. Meanwhile, the UNHCR chief Barham Saleh stressed continued cooperation with Afghanistan and said UN support for returning refugees and their reintegration would continue. Hanafi said more than 8 million refugees had returned to Afghanistan and called for housing and job opportunities to help returnees rebuild their lives and avoid migrating again. He added that narcotics had been completely eradicated in the country and urged international institutions to help farmers with alternative livelihoods. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
China's foreign ministry has wrapped up a week-long tour in Nordic countries. The visit was aimed at strengthening China's engagement with Northern Europe and comes ahead of the China-EU summit on trade, security and international affairs. Mahnur Makhdoom has more on this in Beijing.
China's relations with Nordic countries have grown steadily over the past 2 decades, especially in trade, green technology, renewable energy, maritime cooperation and innovation. The 7-day tour saw Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi deepen Beijing's relations with Denmark, Sweden, Finland and Norway. He held talks with political leaders and foreign ministers on issues including bilateral ties, economic and trade cooperation, green development, climate change, scientific and technological innovation, and international and regional security. During the meetings, both sides acknowledged the importance of maintaining open communication despite differences over issues such as Russia's war in Ukraine, European security, and China's relations with Russia. Nordic leaders also encouraged China to play a constructive role in promoting peace efforts in Ukraine, while discussions covered Arctic cooperation, sustainable development, and expanding economic links. The trip also served as a key diplomatic engagement ahead of the upcoming China-EU summit, with Beijing seeking to reinforce dialogue with some of Europe's most influential Nordic partners. Despite periodic tensions over political and human rights issues, the Nordic region remains an important partner for China in areas such as climate action, clean energy, and advanced manufacturing. Beijing views the region as a valuable gateway for overall engagement with Europe, while seeking to stabilize ties during a time of an increasingly complex geopolitical environment. Wan Maktoum, A News, Beijing.
Okay, after a short break, we'll take a look at other top stories making the headlines today. Don't go away.
We are in Seoul's Republic of Korea, a country that for more than 70 years has lived in the shadow of unfinished war.
I was 18 years old when the Korean War broke out.
My two brothers were dragged out to the front yard of the village public hall and forcibly subjected to a trial under the name of People's Trial.
The military demarcation line, created after the Korean War, became a massive wall, preventing separated families from meeting.
Less than a kilometer away lies North Korea.
지금 우리 무장력은 그 어떤 위기에도 대응할 철저한 준비가 되어 있으며
Подписанный сегодня договор предусматривает в том числе оказание взаимной помощи в случае агрессии против одного из участников.
Russian-Ukraine war now is connected with North Korean participation in Russian army.
The complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is the only outcome that we will find acceptable.
If the U.S. persists in such hostile policy towards the DPRK, there will never be denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
More than 20,000 partisan fighters have been hidden. We found only 3,000.
My grandmother had 3 brothers. In the graveyard, the body of just one of them.
Their struggle was very unequal and against a state that had defeated such a force as Nazi Germany.
A lot of resistant fighters in the beginning of Soviet occupation actually would end up here, if not killed somewhere in the woods.
She was arrested at her home. Her 7-year-old daughter ran to her and screamed, "Mom, please take me with you." This record having the names of the individuals who were placed in the list of deportations.
I was born in Kengia, in a labor camp. My mother was a partisan liaison.
The first years were extremely difficult, of course. Poverty, hunger. The temperature sometimes dropped to minus 50 degrees.
The train stations, like the one behind me, once said goodbyes to thousands of people carried from across the Baltic states toward Siberia.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome back. You are watching Primetime. The South Caucasus is of great importance to Estonia. In an exclusive interview with A News, Estonia's Defense Minister Hanno Pevkur told our correspondent Nuray Mustafa that the opening of Estonia's new embassy would help further strengthen relations with the region.
We've had different times in our relations, but it seems that now when the embassy will be opened, then the relations will be more intense. But let's see. Of course, it's not 1 day or 1 hour decision, so we need to work on that. What are the relations? And then, of course, for us, this region entirely is very important. So we try to have in the region more visibility. Let's see. Of course, it's the main responsibility of the Foreign Ministry, but all the government is working on that.
Azerbaijan has unveiled its newly acquired JF-17 Thunder Block 3 fighter jets for the first time. It highlights a major milestone in its expanding defense partnership with Pakistan.
Azerbaijan is upgrading its combat aviation with JF-17 Block 3 fighter jets, strengthening Baku's defense links with Pakistan and Turkey. The move marks a shift from Azerbaijan's MiG-29 fleet to a fourth-generation plus multi-role fighter built through Pakistan-China cooperation. Azerbaijan officially presented the JF-17 C Block 3 to President Ilham Aliyev in September 2024, with officials saying the jets had already entered the Air Force arsenal. The fighter is designed for all-weather, day and night missions and is equipped with AESA radar, electronic warfare systems, modern avionics and helmet-mounted display technology. Its key advantage is beyond visual range combat, including compatibility with China's PL-15E air-to-air missile, expanding Azerbaijan's interception and deterrence capability. The aircraft can also support precision strike missions and operate within battlefield networks involving drones, targeting systems, and tactical data links. That makes the JF-17 Block 3 part of Baku's move toward network-centric warfare, where fighters, unmanned systems, and electronic warfare assets operate together. The program also carries geopolitical weight. Azerbaijan has ordered 40 aircraft, making it Pakistan's largest ever defense export contract, according to reports. For Islamabad, the program extends Pakistan's defense industry beyond South Asia. For Azerbaijan, it deepens military cooperation with Pakistan and Turkey, especially as Baku expands interoperability with Turkish drones, systems, and training.
A major escalation in the Gulf has heightened fears of a wider regional conflict and renewed concerns over global energy supplies. The United States carried out airstrikes against several targets in Iran on Tuesday, hours after revoking a waiver allowing the sale of Iranian oil.
The latest US strikes on Iran were absolutely necessary. That's according to NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, who, speaking at the NATO summit in Ankara, blamed Iran for violating the ceasefire. Rutte said the US response was both justified and essential.
I also expect allies today to discuss Iran.
I expect allies today to reconfirm that Iran should never, ever get its hand on a nuclear capability. And secondly, that the principle of the freedom of navigation, so the Strait of Hormuz completely opening up again, is a sine qua non, is crucial for all 32 allies.
Iran condemns the latest US strikes on Iran, calling them a violation of the Memorandum of Understanding signed with Washington last month. Iranian state media says that Qeshm Island, Bandar Abbas and Sirik were hit, with several people reportedly injured by shrapnel. Iran's parliament speaker, Mohammad Bakir Kalibaf, has accused Washington of repeatedly violating the ceasefire agreement. In a social media post, he cited the military strikes, renewed oil sanctions and threats of further attacks, saying Iran would not give in to pressure. The comments come after the United States launched major military strikes on Iran on Tuesday, accusing Tehran of attacking 3 commercial oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has not directly claimed responsibility. US Central Command, or CENTCOM, says American forces struck more than 80 targets, including more than 60 small boats operated by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, along with missile launch sites and command centers. The US says the operation was intended to protect commercial shipping and impose heavy costs on those responsible for attacking vessels in international waters. The latest escalation follows Washington's decision to revoke a waiver that had temporarily eased some oil sanctions on Iran. Tehran says that move also breached last month's agreement and accused the United States of acting in bad faith. Iran's foreign ministry said Washington would be responsible for the consequences of what it called repeated breaches of the agreement. It added that Tehran would take any measures it considers necessary to protect its national interests and security. Qatar and Saudi Arabia have also condemned the attacks on the tankers, saying vessels from their countries were targeted while crossing the Strait of Hormuz, and both blamed Iran.
Western efforts to limit Russia's oil revenues are putting renewed focus on the shipping companies still carrying Russian crude and on how much money they have made under the G7 price cap system.
Greek shipping companies have earned billions of dollars from transporting Russian oil, despite Western efforts to limit Moscow's energy revenues. That's according to a Financial Times analysis, which says Greek ship owners made at least $3.8 billion from the trade over the past 3 years. The report says Dynacom Tankers, Stealth Maritime, and the Onassis Group were among the biggest earners under the G7 price cap system of $60 per barrel. Since July 2023, Dynacom has earned more than $915 million from Russian crude shipments. Onassis Group's Olympic Shipping and Management earned at least $404 million, while Stealth Maritime and Polembros Shipping each made more than $200 million. The report also recalls tensions between Athens and Kiev after Ukraine briefly listed several Greek tanker companies as international sponsors of war in 2023 before removing them following pressure from the Greek government. The trade is permitted as long as oil from Russia is sold below the G7 price cap, but enforcement has faced criticism. The Financial Times says its estimate covers 389 million barrels shipped by Greek companies, while further cargoes were excluded because pricing data was unavailable. The report also says 8 of the 20 companies earning the most from Russian oil shipments since June 2023 are Greek. The findings come as the US and European Union step up efforts to tighten sanctions on Moscow's energy revenues.
Still on Russia-Ukraine war-related news, beyond the damage caused by the fighting, people in Kyiv are facing difficult choices as they try to rebuild a sense of stability in their daily lives. Here's more.
Residents in Kyiv are deciding whether to stay in the Ukrainian capital after a deadly Russian missile and drone attack destroyed part of a residential apartment block. On Tuesday, residents living near the damaged building said they faced a difficult choice between staying in Kyiv or leaving their homes, comparing daily life to playing Russian roulette.
So what are we going to do? What options do we have? There are options to leave the country, but for me, those aren't options. Our country is our country. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Russian roulette, or whatever they call it. That's how we're living right now.
Even today I was talking to my son that it would be nice to move to somewhere out of Kyiv, at least to some village. But I'm tied to my job, to my work. I haven't got an online job.
The attack was part of a wider wave of Russian missile and drone strikes on Monday that killed at least 28 people across Kyiv and the surrounding region, according to Ukrainian officials. Ukraine's military says it was unable to intercept any of the 23 ballistic missiles launched during Monday's assault, highlighting growing concerns about the country's air defenses.
Welcome. Thank you so much.
Elsewhere, speaking at the NATO Defense Industry Forum during the NATO summit in Ankara, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called on European allies to accelerate the development of a homegrown anti-ballistic missile system.
In other news, an African Union delegation is in Juba as South Sudan prepares for its first elections since independence. The visit comes amid opposition anger over changes to the 2018 peace deal, with critics warning key safeguards are being removed before the December vote.
An African Union ad hoc committee known as the Committee of Five, or C5, is in Juba. It includes the foreign ministers of South Africa, Rwanda, Chad, Nigeria and Algeria, and comes ahead of South Sudan's first ever elections since gaining independence from Sudan in 2011. The visit comes after President Salva Kiir's government altered a 2018 peace deal that ended a brutal civil conflict and brought about a power-sharing agreement involving the main warring parties. Amendments include removing parts that demanded a new constitution before elections and changing parts that required a population census be done before the polls. The government says a new constitution and census will come after December elections. The African Union says it is in the country to properly understand the issues in South Sudan.
Ministerial visit of the C5 African Union Committee is a testimony of the willingness of the African Union to support the peace process in South Sudan.
South Sudan's government defended the changes to the peace agreement, arguing they were needed to end the transitional period where governments are formed by peace deals and move the country toward democracy. It says it is open to views from the African Union to help the country move forward.
The President also went further to constitute an inter-party committee that was charged with the responsibility of addressing certain political areas. And that is to ensure that when we go for election, the parties to the agreement, including the non-signatory and whole-out groups who will be invited, and a whole lot of regional and continental representatives will be invited for this dialogue.
The largest opposition group in the country, led by suspended Vice President Riek Machar, who is currently on trial facing charges of murder and crimes against humanity, has rejected the move to hold elections in December. It has also rejected the amendment to the 2018 peace accord approved by Parliament. Machar's group is demanding the unification of former rival armed forces before the polls. Machar's party is demanding its leaders' release and freeing of others facing trial with him. It is also demanding an inclusive dialogue process to agree on the way forward and an end to violence across the country before polls. However, President Kiir's team says the current arrangement to prioritize elections will bring lasting peace in the country.
We really hope that this process will take the country peacefully towards election, and that there will be political consensus, there will be nationalism and patriotism, and all of us together, including non-signatory and signatory, will come back to the country and we engage in a political democratic process.
The African Union C5 is meeting with government officials, civil society groups, as well as members of the diplomatic corps in Juba. It says it is committed to mobilizing resources to support the implementation of the 2018 peace deal.
Morocco and China have signed 3 customs deals aimed at speeding up trade, cutting delays and strengthening Morocco's role as a gateway between Africa, Europe and Asia.
Morocco and China had signed 3 customs agreements to make bilateral trade faster, safer and more predictable. The deals build on the strategic partnership between the two countries and reflect the growing importance of economic ties between Rabat and Beijing.
Sino-Moroccan relations are strategic. They were elevated to the level of a strategic partnership following the visit of His Majesty King Mohammed VI. May God assist him, to China, where he met with President Xi Jinping. This momentum was further reinforced by President Xi Jinping's recent visit to Morocco, during which he had the opportunity to meet His Royal Highness Crown Prince Moulay Hassan.
The first agreement strengthens customs assistance and information exchange to fight fraud, under-invoicing, and false declarations. The second recognizes trusted economic operators, giving approved companies faster procedures and smoother market access.
Opening channels under the Authorized Economic Operator Program, along with the twinning between the ports of Casablanca and Nigbo, will directly contribute to reducing customs clearance costs and lowering shipping expenses, giving Moroccan companies a stronger competitive edge in accessing Asian markets.
For Moroccan businesses, the deals could reduce delays, improve transparency and strengthen access to Asian markets. They also support Morocco's role as a regional trade, logistics and investment hub.
These customs agreements represent a strategic leap that strengthens Morocco's position as a global logistics hub, linking Africa, Europe and Asia. They also move Morocco from being a traditional trade partner of China to becoming a trusted logistics and security ally.
The third agreement links Casablanca Port with Ningbo Port, one of China's major maritime gateways. It focuses on customs modernization, risk management, data analysis, training, and faster cooperation.
The latest agreements between China and Morocco will help strengthen the performance of Moroccan ports and increase their capacity by making their services faster, more efficient and more reliable. These partnerships also reinforce the position of Moroccan ports as logistics platforms capable of leading at both the African and Mediterranean levels.
For Morocco, the deals go beyond customs. They support port competitiveness, secure supply chains, and strengthen the country's role as a gateway between China, Africa, and Europe.
Well, that's our show. Thank you so much for watching, and join us again tomorrow. From all of us here at A News, have a very nice evening.